I am a Zack Snyder fanboy. It's only fitting that I review Rebel Moon. Let's go. Rebel Moon stars Sofia Boutella, Ed Skrein, Michael Hausman, Ray Fisher. I didn't even realize that was Ray Fisher. Holy crap. Djimon Hounsou, and is directed by Zack Snyder. What's up, guys? Welcome to a brand new 2023 review. I knew Zack Snyder was coming out with Rebel Moon. I didn't know anything about the movie. And I'll even say this right now. I just gave this a second watch because, not gonna lie, the first watch, it just was not clicking with me whatsoever. Even though this is an original property, it feels like it's really borrowing heavily from other properties like Dune and Lord of the Rings and The Matrix even, and of course Star Wars. With that in mind, as I was watching this and not knowing the backstory on the movie, I think I was prejudging it. And don't get me wrong, there are some major problems with this movie, okay? Gonna say that up front, but there's some good here as well. And I will say I'm definitely looking forward to part 2. And I'm also looking forward to the director's cut to both of them. We'll talk more about the director's cuts as we get into the review, because I want to get to the quick plot synopsis. So our main character is Cora, played by Sofia Boutella. She's part of this civilization, and they're like a group of farmers. And immediately at the beginning of the movie, this Admiral Noble, played by Ed Skrein, shows up, and he wants to take all of their harvest, right? And he will not take no for an answer. And there is an act, which I won't spoil, at the beginning of the movie, that's pretty much him showing that he is not one to be messed with, and you have so long to get him his harvest, or there's going to be hell to pay. And he leaves some of his men behind who are not nice guys at all, and there's a situation with one of the girls on there, and they literally try to R-word her. I don't know if I can say that on YouTube, right? And so this is when Cora realizes, okay, this cannot happen. We need to stop the mother world. And she goes to recruit this band of misfits to fight them. Very similar to, I guess, the first Star Wars, even though I think there's more what you would call key characters in this. Whereas in Star Wars, it was Luke, it was Obi-Wan, Han Solo, Princess Leia, and then your main baddie, Darth Vader. Now, one of the complaints I've heard about this is just very one-dimensional villain here. And what I mean by one-dimensional is that there's nothing to like whatsoever. He is purely evil. He is a space Nazi, which that is a problem because how many times we're going to have Nazis as villains in movies? To be fair, though, I have no problem with a pure evil villain. Darth Vader himself, you know, before we get into who he was as a child and so on, before he was Anakin, all we knew about him in the first Star Wars was he was just pure evil. And he goes down as one of the greatest villains of all time. So those complaining about that, I don't want to say you're wrong, but you're kind of wrong. There's no problem with an evil villain. We still have them to this day. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 people. We like those types of villains. Now, having said that, I'm not propping up Admiral Noble at all. He's nothing to write home about. He's definitely no Darth Vader. He's just a serviceable villain, okay? He's a meh villain, if you ask me. You got to do more than just kill people to show that you are a threat. Darth Vader was so much more than that. So I think that's what they're talking about. Also, really the biggest problem with this movie is the one-dimensional nature of the heroes. There's potential, like for instance, Djimon Hounsou. You know, this is an actor that we've seen in so many freaking movies over the past, 20 years. And he never ages, by the way. But I love his style of acting, even though he's kind of the same character in most of the movies, but he's just ultra likable. And he is a general in this. And I like how when they found him, he's all washed up and he is at the end of his rope, almost end of his life. You know, he's an alcoholic. Really quickly, they sober him up like that's something easy to do. But I did like the idea that he's this legend and they need to kind of bring him back to life. But then there's really no payoff in this movie for him. And I wanted to see him, I guess, flex and kick ass and whatnot, and you don't really get that. This is more about just gathering the team right? And you might get one cool scene with them. Like Tarek, he's this prisoner and we get to see him ride this like eagle death bird. That's what I call it. Charlie Hunnam plays Kai, and he's your Han Solo type character, your question mark even. I don't hate him as a character, but I don't think he really sends it home. You know, he's no Harrison Ford. Now, I do really like the action scenes in this movie, though. There's just not too many of them. I would say maybe there's 3 big action set pieces along the way. And, you know, they are Zack Snyder action set pieces. There's a lot of slow motion. And I mean that in a good way. You know, there's bad slow motion and good slow motion. And I think Zack Snyder, if you're a fan of his work, I think he really delivers in that department, in the action department, knowing when to kick things in slow motion and when to speed it up a little bit. Some might say he is a little overkill with it, but it's beautiful to look at. And by the way, that's another problem I have with this cast. Not really a problem, but they all look like supermodels. But I must admit, on the second watch, I did find myself enjoying the story, even though I was wanting more out of the story. I did kind of connect with the characters a little bit better on the second watch. I don't think there's too much exposition, but it is a problem in some parts of the movie. But I don't think the exposition really gets in the way. Really, I think this should have been more of a TV series, because when they go into Cora's backstory, there's a section in here where they're explaining her story when they could have just made that an entire episode, honestly, and I would have been fine with it. Now, I didn't do my homework on who composed this. I'm guessing it's Junkie XL. It sounds like his work from previous Zack Snyder movies. I could be wrong. It's a big selling point, and it's almost like the glue that holds this movie together. The score, it's not too forceful, but it's still beautiful, and it definitely hits you in the feels in some parts. Zack Snyder, I think his movies do that very well. There's some great emotional moments, and I think that's one thing that really sold me about Batman v Superman. Knowing when to really accent those emotional moments. And I think, and this is a controversial opinion, but I think Zack Snyder does it better than, you know, a lot of the MCU movies. You know, I guess one exception is like, say, Infinity War, even Civil War, stuff like that. There's some great emotion, but I think oftentimes Marvel leans way heavily on comedy more than the DCEU did, at least the Zack Snyder version. As I was saying about those director's cuts, I was reading a little bit behind the scenes on this and why we didn't just get that version in the first place. I couldn't really get the full answer as to why, but I do think the version that was ready for Netflix is the PG-13 version. But also, I think it's just a good way to give more content on Netflix. I'm always game for a Zack Snyder director's cut, because it's not like you know, your normal unrated cut of any average movie where they tack on like 3 to 5 minutes. No. And if you look at a recent interview with Zack Snyder, he states that it's almost like an alternate version of the movie. That remains to be seen.
In the what's called the PG-13 version, I think.
This is the very tame version.
How more extreme will the director's cut be?
Way more brutal. It's way more, but it's also more bizarre. It's just more. It's more Verhoeven-esque, I guess, if you want to think about it in those ways. You know, it's more RoboCop in the way that kind of uses violence as like another character. You know, and we have and also there's a lot of sex in it too in the R-rated version.
But I am really curious about this director's cut, because it's very possible that this movie could go from just an average rating to a much higher rating. A lot of people came around to the ultimate cut of Batman v Superman. I did watch the trailer for part 2 of Rebel Moon as well, and it does look really interesting. And finally, I think we get to see these characters dig in a little bit more, because that's the one thing that had me scratching my head about this movie was, okay, you've introduced these characters, and I do kind of dig them, but can you give me a little bit more? But also, Zack Snyder came to Lucasfilm. He had this idea of Rebel Moon, but originally it was going to be a Star Wars story, and I guess they declined. And, you know, comparing this to some of the Star Wars stuff that's been out, especially the TV stuff, I think this was better. But I think Zack Snyder had to shift the story a good bit to make it not too Star Wars. But there's definitely a Star Wars-like moment where you have the double red lightsaber, even though it's not technically a lightsaber, it's more just swords. But I guess the way to look at this is, hey, this is Zack Snyder's Star Wars story, and they didn't want it, so why not let us at least watch it, right? So you can kind of go into this with that kind of headspace. Okay, I'm watching a Zack Snyder Star Wars movie. I don't think it's fair to call it just Star Wars. Like I said, it's a mix of quite a few different properties. And it's not better than any of them. That's one of the big issues with this movie. I gotta be fair. But again, I'm ready for the director's cut. Hopefully it's a better version of the movie, because right now, as a rating, I gotta give this just a straight up humdrum. I did have a good time with it. And I was kind of moved by some of the music. I really liked Sofia Boutella as Cora. Cora's a good character, I think. But I think the other characters need a little bit more working. So let me know your opinions on Rebel Moon. It's a weird review for me because we know that there's a different version coming. It's almost like cheating, like, okay, you don't like this version? Well, you just wait because we got a better version coming. You know, most movies don't get that chance. Also, guys, I just started Drumdums memberships. You can join if you want. You'll see the little join button below. But I definitely want to dedicate this review to my first 3 members. We got Exclusive E, Gaz1985, and Sean Sheridan. Welcome to Drumdums memberships. Check it out, guys. And memberships is cool because if you don't want to do the Patreon thing, it just gives you another way to support the channel. So big thanks for that, guys. Anyway, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day. And on Fridays, we do FIFA Fridays. Follow my Drumdums on my socials. Support me on Patreon. Buy me a coffee. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Drumdum out.